Okay, let's talk about how to find a flat in London, because this is one of my most frequently asked questions every time I post something about moving to London or my tips or my journey. And let me tell you, I feel your pain. If you are flat hunting in London or you are planning to move to London anytime soon, you have likely been inundated with all those videos on TikTok or your feed of like the horror stories of flat hunting in London, of it taking like 50 plus viewings or more than 3 months for people. And let me just say, I completely understand that's exactly where I was when I moved last year. And what I actually found in that situation is that it was a lot more helpful to just sit down and watch like these longer, more in-depth videos. So I'm making my own version of that. This is kind of just like no BS advice for trying to find a flat in like one of the most competitive rental markets in the world. We're going to cover the 6 main steps that it takes to kind of secure a flat in London, and I'm going to give you all the tips that I learned from actually going through this process last year, plus what not to do at the end, so definitely stick around for that. And I've got my laptop because I absolutely don't want to miss any of the details out, so get yourself a coffee. I have a little iced coffee number, and let's just like settle into this. And if you're new to my channel, by the way, my name is Jess. I am a Kiwi, a New Zealander who did the very Sagittarius thing and changed up her whole life and moved from Auckland, New Zealand to London in the UK last year. I learned a lot of the stuff I'm going to share by just kind of ad hoc going through the process myself last year, but I think it's important to point out that they do sometimes require a certain level of like financial planning or workplace flexibility, and so you don't need to follow all of these tips to secure a place in London, but they do really help with speeding up the process or making it just a little bit easier. Let's start with kind of the most critical thing, and that is determining your budget. This is obviously going to depend on factors like your income, your expenses, your other sort of obligations, and your lifestyle. When determining your budget, you will also want to factor in your other fixed costs for renting. So those are things like gas, electric, internet, your water bill, and of course, council tax. Quick little definition on council tax. This is the local tax that is paid to access the council services in your area. It does unfortunately fall to the tenant to pay, and the thing with council tax is that the actual monthly cost of it can vary widely depending on what band the property or area sits in. So make sure you kind of figure that out before you go searching and looking at what types of areas you want to live in. My number one tip when setting your budget is to determine a range. So set something that is like your ideal budget, that is comfortable for you to live on, and then set a number that you would possibly stretch to if, say, the property and the area was absolutely perfect. And when you are searching for properties, make sure you are looking for ones that are about 10% below your ideal budget, because depending on how competitive the listing is, you may well need to offer a little bit over the asking price. Okay, now let's talk about where to live. If you are not familiar with London, it can be quite overwhelming to try and figure out the area of where you want to base yourself, especially considering there's like 32 boroughs, 9 different zones, and I think like 279 prets according to Google. Where you live will be dependent on a couple of factors, and I think it is these 3 main things. Number 1, your budget versus your desire for space. Obviously, the more central, the smaller your space is going to be, and if you go further out, your budget is going to get you more for your money. The second factor is obviously what is your work and lifestyle like. You want something that is going to not be too bad for your commute, so you have to factor that in, but also thinking about things like what do you like to do on the weekends? Do you like to go to coffee shops? Do you like to have a green space or a park nearby? Consider these things when you are looking at the area that you want to live in. And the last thing to factor in is whether or not you have a community already based in London, because it can be a bit of a trek to get across the city, and if you're spending like all your Friday nights and weekends with these people, you don't want to be doing that all the time. Once you have figured out these 3 things, I really recommend making a list of sort of places that suit this criteria. And if you are new to London and you are moving here from another country, I really suggest spending like your first 1 to 2 months in a sublet or like temporary accommodation, because it gives you the time to kind of explore these areas, not feel rushed, and find sort of what places suit you. Now, how do you actually know what kind of place to look for? What I recommend doing is getting very clear on this and sitting down with like your flat hunt group, whether it's like flatmates or your partner, or if it's just you, lucky you, and making a list of like the essentials and the nice to haves in a place. The list of essentials in my mind are things that you absolutely won't compromise on. So these are things like having a safe feeling commute walk, having equal sized bedrooms if you're looking with a group, or something like what council tax band the property sits in. And the nice to haves are the cherry on top. So they're not like essential or a deal breaker, but you know, it would make life a little bit easier if you had them. So like maybe a dishwasher, maybe you like the look of hardwood floors or updated decor, those types of things. And sometimes it just takes viewing a couple of different types of places to get a feel for what you actually like. So go and have a look at like a newish apartment in a high rise, go have a look at like a historic conversion, go have a look at a smaller flat and see what kind of space or area you like. The more you see, the more you'll get a feel for what kind of place you want. The most important thing is that if you are really clear on this list, the quicker your decisions are going to be in like the viewing, the search, and like the offer process, and that is going to help you immensely. Now we talk about finding a place. What is more competitive than the Hunger Games? Getting a flat viewing in London, that's what. Firstly, where do we find these magical places? Well, Zoopla and Rightmove are kind of like the two main ones. If you want to rent directly from a landlord, you can have a look at Open Rent, or Spare Room if you just kind of want a room in a flat share. There are more, but I find that Rightmove and Zoopla have pretty much all the listings, so it was just easier to stick with those ones. And the process then is basically you just set up like push notifications and email notifications on these websites or apps, and you check. You check a lot. Morning, on your lunch breaks, just before the estate agents close in the afternoon, keep checking to see what new listings have been added. My process then was basically I would quickly evaluate if the listing ticked all of my essentials boxes, and if it did, I would call immediately and book a viewing with the agent. Don't mess around with emails, don't mess around with inquiry forms, just call and book it. Is the only way I got viewings in my whole last flat search. And then what I would do is that night or a couple of times a week, I would go home and like review in depth all of the listings that I had booked. I'd look at the photos and just double check that I really actually wanted to go and look at this place, because you can always cancel a viewing, but if you get to the end of the day and all the viewings are booked up, you can't go and book it again. So book the viewing, evaluate if you really want to go to it later, but just have the option to have it locked in into your calendar. So you've got the viewing and you're actually going to go and look at the place now. Yay! Unfortunately with London viewings, you don't get a lot of time to like meander around and decide if you can deal with the red curtains or not. So just go in prepared. Lists really help. Again, here, have a list of like the top 10 things or questions that you need to check, and boom, 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 go in and look at all of those and check them off. Some things you might want to add to your list inside the property when you're looking around are things like, what's the water pressure like? What's the condition of the property like? What's the heating and cooling system? Is there any mold? What's the street noise level? Just have a good look around for those types of things. Outside the property, it might be looking at things like, what's the condition of the other flats or houses around? How far is it to like the local high street? And definitely walk your commute, whether that's to a bus stop or a tube station. And don't forget before you leave to ask the agent or the landlord what the situation is with offers. Quite often, if it is a competitive property, they will ask for all the offers from the first day of viewings by the end of the day. So you like the property and you want to make an offer. My advice here is that if you have a good feeling about the place and it checks all of your boxes, just throw your hat in the ring. You're not committed to anything until you sign or pay a deposit, so you might as well just put your offer out there. You can sometimes be asked to pay a holding deposit when you put your offer down, but in my case, I just said, hey, can we just pay this if our offer is accepted? And there was no problem with that, so it's always worth asking. With your offer, at least in this current crazy market of 2022, 2023, I highly recommend going in with your strongest position, especially if you really want the place and it seems like it'll be competitive. With this current market, you will likely need to offer at least the listing price, if not a little bit more, but there are other things you can do to kind of make your offer a little bit more attractive, and these are things like how long you're willing to sign the lease for, or how many months rent in advance you can put down at the start. When we secured our flat, both my husband and I were still in the trial periods for our job, and so we had to put down 6 months of rent in advance for that kind of added security. So good to know about that if you're moving to London from abroad. And then my last tip here is to make a little cover letter for like you or your flat search group. Keep this really straightforward, just a little bit about who you are, sort of what your financials are like, what you're like as a tenant, and you can even include like reference quotes from your previous landlord or flatmates. And in a world where your offer is accepted, which I'm crossing fingers for you that it is, you then have a very simple and straightforward process. You just kind of go through your reference and credit checks, so make sure you have that information handy, and then you sign your tenancy agreement and put down your deposits and organize your move-in date, and you start shopping on IKEA. At least that's what I did. I think this has been the longest video of my life, but we are finally at the final section, which is what not to do when you are searching for a flat in London. The first one is obviously avoiding scams, and this is very simple and easy. Just go through reputable agencies when you're viewing a flat. It's very clear who they are once you start your flat search, and do not by any means put down any sort of money or holding deposit before viewing a place. Clear sign, something fishy is happening. The second thing you'll want to avoid is not following your gut. Now, renting a place in London can be a very confusing and overwhelming decision-making process, but at the end of the day, you have to live in this place for however long, so you need to follow what is like true to you and what feels right, and don't make a wrong decision that is like rushed. Just go with your gut. And the last one is being so excited that your offer's been accepted that you're not actually paying attention to any of the details that's in your contract or the fees that you're being charged. You'll want to make sure all your deposits and fees are correct, and you will also want to have a look at details like break clauses in your contract and just check that's all good. And if you find anything a bit too confusing, chuck it into ChatGPT and ask it to explain it in simple terms. This is by no means legal advice or a replacement for that, but it does help you kind of wrap your head around some of the more confusing terms in a contract. Now that was a lot of information, but once you get into the swing of flat hunting in London, it's not that bad, not as bad as a lot of people on the internet make it out to be, especially if you have like a really methodical and practical plan like this. And in my opinion, the most important thing is just kind of managing your expectations. Like, London is big and busy and crazy, and you are never going to 100% get what you want. So just keep those expectations in check, and your emotions will be a lot more okay during the flat search process. Now, if you want another reality check on moving to London, you can check out how much it actually costs to move from New Zealand to London in this video here. Or if you want something a little bit more lighthearted, check out one of my London vlogs, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!